We're live! Yay!
No, that's a bit enthusiastic. Okay, here we go. This is Literary Roadhouse. One short story once a week. I'm Gerald.
I'm Anise.
I'm Rahimi.
And if you haven't read this week's story yet, pause the podcast, read the story, and then return to us. Today, we hear from Kate, who's just been diagnosed with cancer and faces surgery and chemotherapy. She's a single mother and afraid to tell her 9-year-old daughter until an old friend comes to stay with them. Frederick has a strong bond with 9-year-old Eve, and they enjoy some days together until finally Frederick tells Eve on a day trip to a Toronto island.
All right. So what did you guys think of the story overall? Rami?
It was decent. Nothing spectacular.
Ooh. I loved it. I loved it to death. I loved it. I was going to say more than anything else. No, it was a great story.
Okay, I think I'm between you guys, but leaning towards Rami. So, which isn't to say there's some things about it that are really effective and that I really liked. There were some sentences that jumped out at me, and at the end of it, I wanted more. So that's effective writing. And yet the reason I wanted more was because I was feeling a little bit like I hadn't had enough to chew on yet. So it was a little bit because I like where this is going, and I like the writing, and I don't think I had enough to feel satisfied by the time I got to the end of the story. So I think that's why I'm leaning a little bit towards Rami here. Rami, why did you say it's decent, nothing spectacular?
So I've been wanting to propose this for quite some time now, so I'll take this opportunity to do so. You know how you and Maya and Gerald also usually describe stories that they think are kind of middle of the road as competently written.
Mm-hmm.
So I had found a new word to convey this description, which is creditable, which means it's deserving of praise, but not that amazing.
I think that's worse. Ouch. Anna Rahimi, if you were listening to this, I think there is a lot in here which was absolutely spectacular. I just wanted more of it. Can you write a novel? That's where I'm at.
But then it's over 4,500 words. It's a good sized short story, and I think there is a lot in there. I think there's I think where perhaps it's and I came into this podcast thinking definite 6, but actually now, yeah, I think what it's lacking is that underneath the old iceberg thing, that story, that subtext, that I mean, there's some of it there, but maybe there's not enough.
Here's probably, well, I have a few really good notes, but here's one that jumped out at me right at the beginning, which is, so for aspiring writers, sometimes when you're writing in first person, one of the things that's really hard is how do I reveal my character without making them stand in front of a mirror, right? Like there's always that, like, how do I talk about who my character is without being like, when I was 5, right? Like they're not just like monologuing in their head. And I feel like this writer does an excellent job of giving you these little peeks in a way that doesn't feel like it's exposition or heavy-handed. Like if I had been reading this for pleasure, it wouldn't have jumped out at me, but because I'm analyzing it for this podcast, then I'm looking for stuff like that actively. But there were all these little peeks into the narrator's personality, the sarcasm, the ribbing with Frederick, the mild resentment of her parents retiring in Florida. They absconded to Florida, tanning in oblivion. Just like the word choices that revealed a lot about this narrator that I thought was very clever, or just like Uber, a ridiculous expense, immediately gives you a sense of her social class, because for a lot of people, an Uber back from the train station is probably fine and not ridiculous, right? Not a lot of people, but you know what I mean? Like it gives you a sense of where she is. So, although I don't know what Uber charges in Toronto, so I don't know, maybe Toronto's expensive. But I thought that was really instructive. So if we have an aspiring writer listening to the show who like struggles with the first person how to reveal my character, this writer in particular did it really well. And I thought in a way that I thought was not at all heavy-handed and very adroit.
Since you mentioned Uber, I have to say it did feel strange to read about people taking Uber and chatting on Skype. I'm just happy that she didn't mention Snapchat or anything. It feels it's set in modern times, but I think I don't remember ever reading a story that could have taken place last year, for example, and makes reference to these new technologies.
And I think the danger is that it potentially dates the story as well, because who knows whether Uber are going to be around next year,
right.
and so there is that danger.
Why is it a danger though? Why does that matter? Like when we read old stories and they're talking about whatever, waiting for the gas lights to come on. We're not like, well, the story is no longer applicable to me, right? We still can, yeah.
I think there's a difference between saying that they took a car or a cab and signaling out a company as a verb, like to Google something instead of to search for something online. Because then if the company no longer exists, say in the far future, then it's like, wait, what's an Uber? And then they have to search for it.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. I feel like we're in this is completely sidelined from the show now, from the story. But like, I feel like because now we archive things and information is so readily accessible that if somebody came across Uber 500 years from now, that you'd be like, oh, okay, got it. It'll be x-rayed right on the story where you're reading it from, or like immediately in your brain. Hopefully, I don't know. We're gonna be cyborgs. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like it's not. I guess for me, I you know what? Maybe this is like me being so connected. I didn't even flinch at reading them. Like I was just like, oh, of course you took the Uber. Like it just didn't even just washed over me like normal.
Yeah, I think it did that to me as well, because I know people take Ubers and it has now progressed to where it becomes a verb in itself, like Googling and things like that. And anyway, whatever. And so I think, I don't know. I think it's just a bit unusual. It would have been far easier to say took a cab, and it would then be, instantly understood by everybody. And there might be some people who've not heard of Uber.
Yeah, we could Google it. Well, yeah. Well, anyway, so
it's a minor point. What was I gonna say? If you have something, go ahead.
One thing that struck me about the story particularly was that how it dragged me straight in, and I haven't gone back to analyze why that is, because for any writer, any aspiring writer, you have to hook the reader early on. You have to grab them and make them want to read more of the story, whether it's a short story or a novel. And I just, we're different. Rahimi tends to read the story or knows the story before he suggests them, whereas the rest of us don't. We just choose something that we probably haven't read. And so I just copied the story across and started looking at it. And I just read and read and read. And there was no sense, I've just read enough now. I'm just reading the introduction. It doesn't matter. So it really pulled me into the story, and I think that was very, very skillfully done. And I think it's a technique, and it's a style of writing as well that draws you in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I had that same feeling of being just sort of sucked into the story, and I think that's why I feel like when I got to the end felt a little premature. I felt like, wait, no. I feel like I haven't really. Can I get the part where you go home with Eve and Eve reacts? Like, I just wanted something else here. And I think that's why I'm like, Anna Rahimi, if you are listening, can you write the novel version of this? Like, because I did want more of it. And I think that's why this story, what did transpire in it for me, just didn't feel like enough, because I was already sucked into it. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's over. So I had that feeling. And also, I know a story has sucked me in so I tend to read these in the morning, and that's probably the worst time. It's the best and worst time. It's when my brain is like the most awake, but it's also when all my friends are the most awake. That's when I get the most messages. Then everybody starts their day, they go to work, they stop messaging, they're working now, they're home with their significant others and families. But the morning, everyone's just like, I had this thought. What about this thing, right? So that's when I have the most distraction. So when a story doesn't suck me in, I'm like getting pulled away to all the messages that are lighting up my phone. And in this time, it didn't happen with this story. So it's like a signal for me where it's like I just read through the whole thing without caring what people were messaging me about, because that's when my phone blows up. So that was a really good sign. And I know why. There were some sentences that were just really beautiful. There was this one sentence about when Frederick gets in the earplugs, and she says you can listen to her inner noise, and that she panicked hearing my cells do their work. That like call back to the conflict of the cancer, but without it being overwrought. I just thought it was very effective and beautiful, especially because at that point she hadn't referenced the cancer for a while. So it like brings it back to you in a way that's like, it's ever present for the narrator, it's ever present for you, but it isn't, melodramatic. I thought that was really good.
One thing about since we're talking about being dragged into the story, and I didn't understand it, and I don't really understand it now. When she says in the first sentence, here's what I dreamt when I finally got to sleep in the early morning. Someone had taken all the eggs from my fridge and deviled them. Now I've had to look up what deviled eggs are because I don't know. And what's that about? Is that about something in particular?
Actually, it could be. She has uterine cancer. She has, or ovarian cancer. It's all down there. So I think it might be a double play on the word egg. Here, I had it. Yeah. Now that you mention it, that's probably what it's about, because she's getting a hysterectomy. Yeah, and they're deviled. So that sentence, having already read the story, then afterwards it's that much more powerful. Because I will say, not having known what the story was at all, when I read that first sentence, I'm like, well, that's delightful. Deviled eggs are delicious. And then I'm like, wait, never mind. Not delightful.
Well spotted. Yeah, it's now that makes sense. That's very good.
It might fuck me up half a point.
Yeah, I suppose it is a strange story, isn't it? Because it's we both said it's easy to read. It's well written, it's well crafted. There are specific scenes in there, and it never feels like something's been just dropped in there. The story progresses.
And then just stops. That's the thing. I feel like it wasn't enough. Though I will say I like the characters. They were very well drawn. I got a good sense of Frederick, the narrator, and also either the writer is a mother herself and had a child go through the 9-year-old, or she's just extremely observant. Because this 9-year-old is like all like my nieces and nephews who hit that age. They're at that age where like they're giving you all the gossip from school. That's all they do. Like at that age, 9, 10, it's starting to happen. They're talking about Audrey, the pea gossiper. I thought that was weird. I graded at that section.
Yeah.
Rami, you look confounded.
Yeah. I'm debating whether or not I should ask this, but
Should ask it.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay, fine. But you insisted. So if the phone is so distracting, why don't you just put it away?
Oh my goodness. I mean, you're still on the phone? I do, but I know. It's like it's on silent, but I know. Anyway, this is not about the story.
Or is it a deliberate kind of like barometer or like test to see like how good is the story?
No. I wake up and my phone's blowing up.
I did want to address another point you made about how this could potentially be good practice for aspiring writers about how to draw out a character. And I'm wondering whether my reaction is a consequence of now having read a number of short stories on a regular and consistent basis, that it kind of, for me, felt telegraphed or intentional, that it wasn't, it's like, oh yeah, she's gonna kind of she as in the author is gonna kind of hint at this, so as like I could kind of read what she was doing, which also kind of took me out of the story.
It's funny, that happened to me with the story about the guy from East Germany with time. Remember when I could see what he was doing, it bothered me?
Measures of Time.
Measures of Time. That bothered me in Measures of Time, and I don't know what the difference was, and now I want to compare it. Why did it bother me in Measures of Time but not here? And maybe this one just felt more seamless. Like, you're right, I noticed it because we've been reading so many short stories and we're on the alert for it, but there's something seamless about it where it just sort of transitions, and I don't feel this heavy-handed exposition in the way that I did with Measures of Time, and it'd be interesting to go back and compare.
Yeah, I remember you took issue with all of the German references.
It wasn't the German references, it was the way they were just like dropped in, like, do you know that this is the guy? Like, you know, it just felt very like, you know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gerald, it sounds like your enthusiasm for the story is coming down.
I suppose I think what's happened is that I read it as a short story, and I enjoyed it a lot, and I thought this is a great short story. But now I've come on to Literary Roadhouse, and I've got to analyze it, and I've got to justify why it's a great story and why I particularly enjoyed it, and actually using the sort of template of Literary Roadhouse and the ethos behind this podcast. It's it's just taken the shine off it a little bit. I realized that it's partly because I was so drawn into the story, so I didn't and all the way through I just read it, so I didn't analyze what I was reading until I got to the end and thought, that's kind of difficult. So I read it again and then got drawn into the story again, and I thought, this is good, I like this. So it's now hard to analyze a story that I've enjoyed for the story's sake, rather than being able to analyze what it did and how it did it.
And when I start analyzing what it did and how it did it, I think one of the things that disappointed me was, okay, so the whole point of this conflict is that the mother who's been diagnosed with cancer needs to tell her daughter, but she's afraid to, it's very difficult, and that all makes perfect sense. And in the end, she doesn't, and Frederick does it, which is fine, but then why end the story there? If I'm following the narrator's arc here, and she ultimately did not do the thing that she is supposed to do, then what is the next thing that's supposed to happen? Is there some kind of reproach from Eve? Is there some distance? Like, you know, like, is there a consequence to her decision not to do that? Or is there not? Does this change the way that this information is received? Like, it just felt like you set me up with a central conflict, and it's a do or don't. It went with don't. The decision was made, but there's no result. I think that's why it felt premature to me. I think that's why I just wanted like a few more paragraphs of like, and what is the consequence of this decision that has been the focal point of the story?
I think I just had a quick look again now. I think what she's done, because we are assuming from Frederick and Eve's standing in the water and close to each other and discussing something. And she's assuming that Frederick's telling her. We don't know. And I think that's
not definitive, right?
And I think that's what the author has done. She's left that hanging as a did he, didn't he? And you know, the conflict hasn't been really resolved. So it leaves you a question.
No, I like this better because I'm going to add something to that. I think it doesn't stop there. I think because she describes them as coming out of the water with worried faces in order to convince herself. Like, what if Frederick didn't do it, but she wants to not do this so badly that she is looking for any sign to get out of it. So she tells herself Frederick did it, and she tells herself, oh, there's a proof they have worried faces, but she's reading in their faces what she wants to read to avoid this difficult thing. Then I think that's much more interesting. It's a story about this sort of evasion of that thing that she needs to do, that responsibility. But again, can you give me another paragraph? Like, can I just, you know what I mean? I just want a little more. Then if that's the case, can you deepen that ambiguity a little bit? If I'm supposed to get out of this, she is evading this by, you know, kind of seeing what she wants to see in order to get out of doing the thing that she needs to do. Can I then have Eve afterwards behaving in a way that continues to be ambiguous. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's just something about the way that it ended that just felt really abrupt. Isn't even the right word, because it wasn't moving fast enough to be abrupt. It just sort of like fell.
Yeah, and you know that last sentence, together they make a figure so slender and tall that I have to catch my breath. Their posture deliberate and abiding, throwing a long shadow in the sand as they wend their way towards me, tired now, triumphant, worried, wanting to go home. So there is no resolution there. It's she's making an assumption, and she's leading us to make that same assumption. And she starts to worry how Eve will take it and what Eve will do as a result of having this knowledge, but we don't know.
And I think part of why I'm so attached to finding how Eve is going to react is because she spends a lot of time talking about the woman that she thinks Eve's going to become, that right now she's very moral, and when that has a biting sense of humor and some ironic distance. And what you see in that is these are the things that the narrator likes about herself. She's projecting onto Eve, her child, the qualities about herself that she likes. So I thought that was interesting. There's a part of me that just wants to be like, is that starting to happen? Is this maturing Eve? That's why I want the novel version of this.
Yeah, I think. I mean, and maybe you're right. Maybe there's a bigger story in this, because they are really good characters. I like the interplay between Frederick and Kate. Is it? And I like their relationship, and it's you know, it's occasionally spiky. There's a love, a really good sort of loving friendship there. So yeah, I don't know about a novel though. I don't. Maybe you could make more of her.
You'd have to shift to Eve for a while in order to make a novel.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and maybe do different times or something, or you know, who knows, and give more story to Frederick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what did you guys think about the writing overall? So we've talked about the story, we've talked about the plot, the themes, what you're getting out of it. But so Gerald, based on your past comments on stories, whenever you feel a fuzzy feeling, it's normally because the prose enchanted you.
The prose did enchant me. It enchanted me from the very first sentence. And I, at note, when I did go back to look at certain sentences and certain sections, you can then say, oh, that's really well written. And yet at the time you're reading it, you don't think this is really well written. You're just absorbing the story through these sentences, and they're just they have like a sort of common like a common thread, or I can't think what I'm trying to say. They are of a there's no sort of standout sentences amongst all of this. It's all really well written. The language is all really good, and there's enough interesting practical information and detail. No one goes off on a stream of consciousness or anything like that. It's grounded in the sort of through line of the story, which I really love. So there's everything comes back to Kate and to her relationship with these other two characters. So I like that.
Rami?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. There you go.
Yeah, just yes.
Yes. I'll have to make sure I keep that one in the edit, won't I?
Yes. You liked the prose. Was there anything in particular?
Yeah, I mean, there were some great sentences, but there was one that kind of stood out in particular, but for a confusing reason. So while describing a young Frederick in the second grade, and the sentence goes, one of the nicest things about Frederick in the second grade was that he loved to dress up in his mother's clothes. And I made a note to myself as, why is this described as nice? And not to be judgmental or anything. That's not what I'm trying to say. But it just seems like a strange adjective to put for that. It could be like interesting or I don't know, something else. But I don't know. I was just curious because I don't know if the mother in the story herself. No, I was just confused about that word choice.
I think she's just relating to a memory of an activity they used to do together as children as being nice. Like a nice thing was they can go dress up together. This was a very sweet, endearing thing about him at that age when maybe most boys around, wouldn't already at that age, already being very strongly gendered. This was a sweet aspect about him. He was very, nice, and they would put on these little skits, and she was very shy, and he would, be on his tiptoes. So I think it's just like a fuzzy, warm memory that she has. Daryl, were you gonna say something?
Yeah. No, not really.
No. Yeah. And on a second read through, I get what you're saying, Gerald, on how some of the sentences didn't really necessarily the weight of them doesn't really hit you until you read it again. And one of those for me was when she's talking about Eve coming off one of the rides being woozy. And it goes, I can tell she didn't enjoy herself, but that she'll soon enough supplant the unpleasant experience with a memory of giddiness and thrill, so that the next time she comes upon a nauseating ride in a mediocre amusement park, she'll want to get right back on. So begins the deceitful work of surviving. And that stood out to me because I wouldn't necessarily see that as a deceitful work of but she's projecting because she's being deceitful right now when she's in a bit of a heightened survival mode, right? Like she's the one keeping things secret, putting on a shiny face, not showing her nausea. And there's just all these little things where it's like, yeah, it's what you said before. It's like there's not enough iceberg, but there's just like even on the layer, like there's a lot of play, right? There's a lot of like these little references back to the narrator, the way that she's viewing things through the lens of how she is at all times, and that sort of projection. Is Eve going to grow up to be this amazing person that's also basically me, right? There's all this, which Frederick calls her selfish. Not that she's particularly selfish. I think this is very sort of normal level of that. But I did like that. On the second read through, you catch that.
Yeah. No, it's gee. Yeah. Like you said,
I'm running out of things to say too, which is one of the things that made me nervous about the story was because I feel like it ended. I don't have that much more to say.
No, it's a strange thing, isn't it? It's a really good story. It doesn't quite hit that mark for us as one of our, oh my God, I must remember the story and read it every week until I die, sort of thing. It's a really good story, but something's missing.
Before we started recording, Robbie was saying that it's up for an award, and we were discussing a little bit like it's good, but what is it that makes the editors and the reviewers who read the story think it's worthy of, what's that? Is there something we're missing? If the people from Carver are listening, what are we missing? Like what takes it to that level?
Yeah. Or maybe it's because it's a modern story. Maybe here's the thing: is it that you don't get that sort of gut-wrenching feeling from a modern story? I'm not suggesting it is.
Are you saying this is the current aesthetic? Because I have a feeling that you might be right. So something that's in vogue right now is the sort of essaying, confessional style writing. So there's a sense of like everything's written in that way. We're like, this is fiction, but it doesn't actually read that much like fiction in a way. Like it's very confessional, which is in vogue right now. And also this prose, as nice as it is also like Carve's favorite prose style, right? Like a lot of their stories are in this style. Like there is definitely like a trend.
I can't help it if I like it.
No, you can't. It's totally okay to like this trend. You are allowed to like this trend and to continue reading it. I'm just saying there is a trend. And I wonder if this is just like hitting all the marks right now of what that trend is. Confessional. Is it really fiction? Blurring those lines. This style of writing, which is in vogue right now, and that Carve is showcasing a lot. Yeah, that might be what it is.
Yeah, and and all the stories are based on a very strong sort of through line of story, and the details sort of keep hitting that through line, and you're never in any doubt where you are. It just, you start at the beginning and and you get through to the end, with, you know, and maybe that ending with a didn't he question, let's just leave it hanging. Maybe that's a thing now for you know, competitions and modern literary fiction.
Yeah, and I have noticed, for example, that a lot of the modern stuff right now that's being showcased doesn't have the things that I like, right? Which is like the over the top, oh my God, this was crazy and unexpected. Like now people are poo-pooing that. Like it's supposed to be very realistic. It's just like a simple snapshot of a very real human moment of how we live today. Is right, but I'm still like, but I like the part where like George Saunders like gives them this crazy pill and then they can feel an emotion. Like I still like that part, right? Like the thing that I'm into is not in vogue right now, right? Just like that was really weird. I loved it. No one's into weird right now.
Yeah, maybe with that person who wrote that book that we don't talk about.
In the bar, though.
Yeah, maybe, maybe he is that sort of trendsetter, and he said, okay, you know, I know where you're all at now, but this is where we're going in the near future. This is what we need to be thinking about, and the slightly weird, crazy stuff, perhaps, and maybe it's like a throwback to literary fiction from decades ago and even centuries ago that has this sort of strange thing that sometimes you can't sort of get hold of it, and you have to keep reading it and work hard to get. And that's the thing about this story: you don't have to work hard at it. You can consume it. It's like, you know, a Big Mac. You can just eat it and it's fine. And then the other stories that you have to work harder at, and you do get more out of them if you're prepared to work hard at it. It's a thing, yeah.
You know what? Something I was just thinking, a story that I remember would do that very well. Of you had the through line and then kept referencing the through line was when we read Attitude Adjustment by Tim Gautreau, I believe it's pronounced. I remember there's a story about the priest who had the scar that looked like a railroad line on his head, and that story straddles, I think, the line between this sort of confessional essay style, where that one is very clearly more fiction, it's more distance from the writer, and it has more big moments. There's like a fight in it, there's like a crash in it, like it has more like poof, something happened, but is it quite as crazy as like a Saunders story? Okay. And I remember really liking that story. So I wonder if like this current trend, like, can we move though to being okay with, you know, like, yeah, it's almost like in order for a story to be received in the current moment we're in now, intellectually, it has to feel hyper real. And that's what this is. It feels hyper real. There's nothing crazy happening. I'm like, but I like when the crazy things happen.
Yeah. What was that story you mentioned?
Attitude Adjustment. It was episode 65.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I looked it up real quick. I don't have it memorized. I just remembered the author's name, Timothy Gautreau.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now I want to reread that story.
Nominate the crazy stories then.
I should. I'm going to start putting in a lot more Saunders again and some other crazy people that just go ham, that are just like, you know, especially because like I feel sometimes when that happens, because the thing with this hyper real confessional style is it's like, I agree with you, and now what? It's a little bit like I was discussing with some friends of mine. We all listen to the Slate Political Gabfest, which has 3 hosts, you know, it's Emily Bazelon, John Dickerson, and David Plotz. And we were talking about it, and then we were like, okay, but who's your favorite? And we all were like, I agree with Emily Bazelon all the time, though. So what am I getting out of it? Like, at least John Dickerson, like, challenges me a little bit. And is, you know what I mean? And I think that's the thing that I have with this story is I'm not really feeling challenged. Like, I agree. You're right. Now what? You know, like that. I think that's what's missing for me. Yeah.
That kind of makes sense. That makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah. I don't feel challenged enough. I think that might be it. And I'm satisfied with that conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's rate.
Yeah.
Oh.
Any other conclusions you guys have come to? No. Okay, we can rate. Rami, who is eager to rate.
4.5.
Me too, 4.5.
Oh,
nice. Second week in a row, we're on the same page.
Well, 5.5. Not a 6, but 5.5.
Wow, Gerald's come back. Okay.
Okay, so
you grade Carve on a curve. They paid you, and why aren't you admitting this?
I wish they did pay me.
They should.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so it's quiz time, but before we do the quiz, what are we submitting for next time? Anise.
Exquisite Corpse. It was written by everybody, and it's a New York Times magazine.
Oh, really? Great. Oh, Rami?
So after reading this story, I was curious and finding out that it was the finalist for this award. I'm forgetting the name. I was curious to see which story had won it. And it actually looks interesting. I didn't read it fully, but it's about bull riding. But I'm not going to nominate that one. I'll put it on deck because I still am submitting my story from before, which was After the Race by James Joyce.
Okay.
Which is also sports oriented, which is race car driving.
So right. Well, the quiz this week is not about cancer, not about strange friends that wear their mother's clothes. It is about Canada. Hey.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah, you should know it. It's only just up the way a little bit. Right. So on my screen, I have Anais first and Rami second. Okay. So Anais, Canada's birthday is on, and it's multiple choice. Canada's birthday is on July the 1st, July the 4th, July the 10th.
The 1st?
Correct, Mundo.
Oh, nice.
Rami, in 2015, the population of Canada was around 26 million, around 36 million, or around 46 million.
36?
Correct. You're very good.
Whoa.
Guys. Very good. Anise, the capital city of Canada is Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto.
Toronto.
No,
it's Ottawa. I got tricked.
Oh, yeah,
Montreal?
You see.
I got tricked.
Is
I thought Ottawa was
Ottawa.
just where the central bank was.
Rami, the largest city in Canada is Quebec, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Toronto, Vancouver, or Montreal.
So many choices.
So many choices.
The only cities I know.
Okay. Okay, I'll give you 3 choices.
No, it's fine. I like this. Toronto.
Toronto is correct. Very good. Anais, how many provinces does Canada have? 5, 10, 15, 20, or 25?
15?
No, it's 10. Rami, the smallest province in Canada is Nova Scotia, Quebec, Prince Edward Island, British Columbia, or Alberta?
Nova Scotia.
Prince Edward Island. Okay, Anais. Canada is a bilingual country, but what is the only official bilingual province? Is it Quebec, New Brunswick, Ontario, or Nova Scotia?
Quebec.
Aha! No,
I got tricked again?
You got tricked again. Quebec is all French.
Oh, it's all French.
Oh.
Why would they do that? They're so... Those Quebec...
Quebecois.
Quebecois separationists.
It's New Brunswick. Rami, this is not a difficult one, I don't think. How many oceans border Canada? Is it 1, 2, 3, or 4?
3
is correct. Atlantic, Pacific, and Arctic Oceans. There's one final round. We'll do that. I might as well do that.
But Rami has totally won.
He has totally won, but never mind.
Okay, fine.
I want to read your story.
Listen, I got the tricky ones, okay?
Yeah. That's just how it turns out.
Can I just withdraw myself and let Anais win?
No.
We're doing James Joyce. Go.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, that would be breaking the rules. Right, just for fun, here's the tiebreaker. How many miles is the northernmost tip of Canada from the North Pole? and the clue is it's somewhere close to 525 miles, but it isn't that. So which is it, smaller or larger? Or how much smaller or how much larger? So it's around 525.
512.
Okay. And Rami, you say?
525.
No, you can't say 525.
520.
Well, Rami is closest because it's 518. So he even wins the tiebreaker.
Wow, Rami.
Dear.
I didn't know you were such a Canadian.
Yeah.
Nice
Lucky
people.
you, because one thing I learned in this story is even if Uber is a ridiculous expense and you live above a laundromat or whatever adjacent to it, you can still get surgery and chemo. So that's nice. Thank you, Canada. It's great. All right.
So what are we reading next time, Rami?
It's After the Race by James Joyce.
Okay. But before you go, tell us that terrifying, urgent thing on your mind at literaryroadhouse.com. We're also looking for a Frederick. Follow us on Twitter at LitRoadhouse and audition to be the Frederick of our dreams. Did you, like me, want more story? Join the Literary Roadhouse Book Club, a monthly show that discusses full fiction novels wherein we may see little Eve grow up. And finally, we now have a new bucket list item. Visit the Toronto Islands and take a terrifying carousel ride and puke from the spider whirly ride. Help us achieve our dreams at patreon.com/Literary Roadhouse. Every bit helps. And as always, share this podcast with the pea gossiper in your life. Until next time, read a good story.